Hello, my name is Ryan Kerr. Welcome to 18th Century Cooking. Today, I have the pleasure of showing you how to make the confectioner's treat, brown bread ice cream. It's going to be delicious. I cannot wait to try it. And if I have done my job correctly, by the time we're done with this, you will be able to make it at home. Thank you for joining me as we savor the flavors and the aromas of the 18th century. Ice cream in the time period is a very strange subject because they didn't really have the science nailed down to make ice cream, but they knew they had something that was happening. And you don't see a whole lot of what we know as ice cream now, like custard, frozen custards in the time period. That doesn't come until a little bit later. This particular recipe is early 1800s, and they're still not adding eggs to make a custard, but this is a cream that is frozen, an iced cream. And it's pretty neat how it's all gonna come together with the body with some breadcrumbs. I think that you're really gonna like it. There are several different ways that you can make iced cream or however you want to say it. This is a sabatier. And this, you'll notice it looks like what is the internal part of an ice cream maker, a homemade ice cream maker, maybe a crank one or an electric one that you might use now. It has a top, and it has an open cylinder, just like what turns around inside of the ice in your bucket or in your electric maker. And so this was how ice cream was oftentimes made in the time period. You would put your mixture inside of here. You wouldn't fill it all the way up, and then you would put it into a bucket or a bowl of ice, and you would just move it back and forth, and you would create ice cream. And that works just fine. The technology hasn't really changed that much. For this particular recipe, she calls for, and I wanted to do it just because it seems really fun, putting the bowl that you are going to be stirring it in into ice. And so you're essentially doing like what, there's probably a term for it. For me, it's like, oh, it's a double boiler, but it's cold instead of hot. Today's recipe was actually found by John, and we talked about it in a live stream and thought, that sounds like a lot of fun. We're gonna do it on the channel. It comes from A New System of Domestic Cookery by Mrs. Marie Rundell, and this is from 1806. Now, I'm gonna go ahead and tell you that cookbooks over time have definitely gotten easier to use and to read. Some early cookbooks will take a recipe and they'll give you it in different chunks. And they'll basically say, to make an ice cream, this is what you have to do. And it's the actual instructions of how to make the ice cream physically. And then it will give you 3 or 4 different options of these are different flavor profiles, and you'll need these ingredients for that. And that's what this recipe does. So for the brown bread ice cream, or brown bread ice is what it's called, it really just gives us 2 lines. Grate as fine as possible stale brown bread, soak a small proportion in cream, 2 or 3 hours, sweeten and ice it. That's it. So what we're gonna do is go ahead and make the brown bread and get that prepared because it needs to sit for a while anyways. And then we'll talk about how to make the actual ice cream. I've got the bread all broken up. You want it to be broken up into fine pieces. And I don't think that you have to be super picky about how small, but you want them to be fairly small. Next thing we need to do is add our cream. Now it says make sure that your cream is not too rich. So what I've decided to do here is do half heavy cream, half whole milk. And I think we're gonna get right where we wanna be. I decided to go with a whole grain wheat bread on this. The recipe calls for a brown stale bread. If you have any bread that's sitting around your house, I'm sure it'll work just fine. You just want to make sure that it's got a good texture to it. You don't want something like, I don't know that sliced bread, that you don't want a bread that if you squish it, it stays in that form. You don't want to use that bread. A lot of times if you get something from the store that's sliced and it's ready to go, you squish it into a ball and it stays in a ball. That's not what we want. We want something that's got nice structure to it. We want something that when you bounce it, it bounces back, right? And so this one here has a little bit of rye in it. This one was wheat, and it doesn't really matter. You just go for the flavor profiles that you like. I wouldn't go as far as pumpernickel bread, I don't think, because that can have a sour taste. If you want sour mixed with your sweet, you go for it. But a lot of the folks around here I don't think would like that. And I'm not gonna eat all of this by myself. I'm gonna share it with my friends when I'm off camera. Another thing worth mentioning in this recipe is that you don't want the crust from your bread, you just want the crumb. The crust is just gonna stick out, and it's gonna be this texture that doesn't make any sense, because in the end what we want is this mixture of bread and cream. And it's kind of like we're taking something like a hot cereal and making an ice cream out of it. I'd say that's pretty close to what we're gonna have. I don't know for sure because we're not there. So let's go ahead and get our cream added, and then we'll get it cold. There's no measurements involved, so really you're just gonna pour it in on your breadcrumbs to where it looks like there's the right consistency from cream and milk to breadcrumb. Once you've added your cream to your breadcrumbs, use sugar and sweeten to taste. So here's the recipe for making the ice. Get a few pounds of ice, break it almost to powder. Throw a large handful and a half of salt amongst it. You must prepare it in a part of the house where as little of the warm air comes as you can possibly contrive. The ice and salt being in a bucket, but your cream into an ice pot and cover it. Immerse it in the ice and draw that round the pot so as to touch every possible part. In a few minutes, put a spatula or spoon in and stir it well, removing the parts of the ice round the edges to the center. If the ice cream or water being in a form, shut the bottom close and move the hole in the ice, as you cannot use a spoon to do that without danger of waste. Note, when any fluid tends toward cold, the moving it quickly accelerates the cold, and likewise, when any fluid is tending to heat, stirring it will facilitate its boiling. All right, so our ice cream is finished. I can go ahead and tell you right now, this takes longer than I thought it did. Now, some of that I think is because we had a hard time getting our bowl's got a lip on it. And so once it goes into the bucket with the ice, there was this space around the sides. And she says really clearly in the recipe that you're basically using those sides to kind of stir the cream up on it. It'll freeze in small layers and then you can stir it back in. And so because the sides weren't super cold, it slowed us down, but we got it done. Let's see what it tastes like. That is really good. I didn't know about this one. The bread is unexpected, even though it's called brown bread ice cream. The cream itself gets quite runny as it begins to melt. But the bread in there helps it feel like it's got body, which is really interesting. And I think like the sugar spreads throughout, and I think that because, I don't know, there's something about that bread that feels like it brings a butter quality into it, which is really interesting. So yeah, try it. Like this is, I don't know anybody who would hate this. Some people, it might not be their favorite thing, but they'll enjoy it. And I think there are a lot of people, if you haven't had this, that will say this is the best thing that I've had in a long, long time. This is really, really good. And it definitely has that homemade ice cream feel to it. And the whole experience, my family grew up making a lot of homemade ice cream. There's the chunks of ice and the salt and everything's kind of a mess. And you're like, is it gonna come together? Is it come together? I don't know. And then bam, it all comes together. and it's awesome. Wow, that is delicious. I really think that you'll enjoy it. I encourage you to try it. I think that this is a super approachable recipe. Anybody can do this. Have a little bit of time with the kids on the back deck and make this up. I think that you'll really like it. If you want to see us give this a whirl and try an ice cream from the time period that is savory, we did a wonderful Parmesan ice cream with the folks over at Conner Prairie a few years back. I really think you'll like it. Check it out here.